Commonwealth Parliament sits at the heart of Australia's representative democracy. As one of the country's most prominent workplaces, it should set the standard for others and be something that Australians look to with pride. It is in every Australian's interest for our Parliament to attract the best talent and for all participants to be able to perform at their best. In March this year, following several people courageously sharing their experiences of bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault, the Australian Human Rights Commission was asked to conduct the independent review of Commonwealth parliamentary workplaces. As I deliver our Set the Standard report today, I firstly want to acknowledge the important role that Brittany Higgins has played as a catalyst for this review by sharing her experience. Her contribution and the impact of that is immeasurable. This review took place in the context of shifting global and national expectations around equality, safety and respect. Employers are increasingly taking concerted action to address sexual harassment and meet higher standards. The aim of this review was to ensure that all Commonwealth parliamentary workplaces are safe and respectful, and that our national parliament reflects best practice in the prevention and response to bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault. The review was not an investigation into individual matters, but a broad, systemic examination of Parliament as a workplace. The terms of reference that guided the review covered the full breadth of parliamentary workplaces, from ministerial and shadow ministerial offices to electorate offices, parliamentary departments and the press gallery. Today, I'm pleased to present the results of our deep engagement with the many individuals who work or have previously worked in these workplaces. The participation in this review was remarkable. In the 3 months from June to August, we received over 1,700 individual contributions from current and former staff and parliamentarians across all parliamentary workplaces. We conducted almost 500 interviews, received more than 300 submissions, and more than 900 people responded to our anonymous online survey. I'm deeply grateful to each of the people who engaged with us. It is a privilege to have been trusted by you. We heard that there is no single parliamentary workplace or culture. There are many individual workplaces and workplace cultures within the parliamentary ecosystem. This includes a wide array of workers beyond parliamentarians and their staff. There are Comcar drivers, parliamentary library staff, staff who work with parliamentary committees, public servants, journalists, security, cleaning, events and catering staff. We made every effort to ensure that we heard from people in as many of these different settings as possible. An overwhelming sentiment shared by review participants was that working in these workplaces is an honour and a privilege. Participants told us of both positive and concerning experiences. Many people shared distressing experiences of bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault, sometimes for the first time. They said these things could never be shared with anyone else. They did so with the hope that they could help make this workplace better for those who come after them. We heard that many people, both current and former staff and parliamentarians, have had meaningful careers motivated by a genuine commitment to contribute to the nation's direction and betterment. However, even those with positive experiences recognise that this workplace does not always meet the standards expected of other modern workplaces, nor the best practice that the nation's parliament should set. There is sometimes a temptation to say that because of its role in national life, it is an exceptional workplace. To say that parliamentarians and their staff are not like the rest of us, that they live and work in a different world. But this does them and us a great disservice. Being exceptional does not mean we should make exceptions. Our report sets out clearly what we heard about working in the hundreds of parliamentary workplaces across the country without identifying anyone. We heard that there are unique characteristics in this workplace that create risks for bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault to occur and go unreported. We heard that parliamentary workplaces are characterised by the high intensity and inherently political nature of the work, the pursuit of political power and advantage, a win at all costs ethos, the frequent blurring of personal and professional life, and an expectation of intense loyalty to political parties. Parliament is inherently about power, and that power runs in multiple directions. We heard that power imbalances and the misuse of power is one of the primary drivers of bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault. Gender inequality and a wider lack of diversity, particularly evident in the low representation of women in leadership roles, means women are more likely to experience misconduct. In any organisation, leadership sets expectations through what is incentivised, rewarded, punished and reported. We heard that in these workplaces, leadership is largely geared towards pursuing external priorities rather than internal culture or people leadership. We heard that offices function better where their parliamentarians or chiefs of staff prioritise people leadership, ensuring people were clear on their roles and responsibilities and expected behaviour and felt safe to report misconduct. However, parliamentarians and their staff largely do not come into these roles with the skills to lead teams effectively and are not set up for success. High-performing teams are essential to the important work of the Parliament, yet people leadership skills are not valued and systems to support people are inadequate. Combined with the lack of accountability to meet consistent standards and enforcement of those standards, and the absence of a strong human resources system to support performance, all these factors create a permissive environment where misconduct can and does occur. Misconduct is often dealt with as a political problem rather than as a people issue. As a result, we heard that people are often punished for reporting misconduct, while others are protected, rewarded, or even promoted for engaging in misconduct. This permissive environment is reflected in the data from our review. Over half, that is 51% of all people currently in Commonwealth parliamentary workplaces, have experienced at least one incident of bullying, sexual harassment, or actual or attempted sexual assault. Gender plays a significant role in shaping these experiences in these workplaces. Across all parliamentary workplaces, 40% of women have been sexually harassed compared to 26% of men. Some cohorts in the Parliament are particularly vulnerable, with staffers and women parliamentarians at highest risk. Women we spoke to told us they felt lucky when they had not directly experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault. Reflecting the role of power in these workplaces, half of people who have experienced sexual harassment and more than 3/4 of those who have experienced bullying said that they were harassed or bullied by someone in a more senior role than they were. There is also a worryingly low level of reporting, indicating that it's not safe to speak. Only 11% of people who'd experienced sexual harassment in a parliamentary workplace reported their experience. These are not just numbers, there is a story behind every statistic. There is a high cost of misconduct to the Parliament, a cost that's borne by people in terms of their health, well-being and future careers, but also a cost to the institution and therefore to Australia in the loss of talent, impacts on team performance and productivity. The challenge of misconduct in parliamentary workplaces is significant, largely because of the complexity of the environment. However, misconduct in these workplaces is not inevitable or intractable. The deep engagement in this review has laid the foundation for change. Most people who contributed to the review did so because they deeply cared about the institution and embraced the opportunity to drive positive change. There is nothing inherent about a Westminster system that prevents Parliament from taking action on misconduct. Parliaments around the world are already taking action, and our Parliament has the opportunity to learn from these experiences and become a global leader on this issue. The recommendations in this report are designed to bring the parliamentary workplace into line with the standards expected of all modern Australian workplaces and support all parts of the Parliament to perform at their best. They are simple solutions to a complex problem. In making our recommendations, we've sought to balance the need for better support with robust accountability. Better support includes systems and processes to guide people and set them up for success. Improved accountability is achieved by clear standards and an independent report and complaints body to create a safe reporting environment and enforce those standards. Drawing on lessons from other parliaments, as well as high-pressure, high-profile workplaces in sporting, military, business and education settings, the report breaks our proposed solutions down to 5 shifts that are required. The first is leadership. Our recommendations are focused on strengthening leadership to foster safe and respectful work environments. This includes both institutional leadership and individual leadership of parliamentarians, office holders and party leaders. Leaders set the tone, and leadership from the top is particularly important to set clear expectations and role model safe and respectful behaviour. The second is diversity, equality and inclusion. In line with corporate Australia, all parties need to set targets and take specific actions for gender balance and diversity in the Parliament and regularly measure and publicly report on progress. We know that what gets measured gets done. The third is systems to support performance. Our recommendations are focused on ensuring parliamentarians and their staff have human resources systems, processes and advice tailored to the specific needs of their context to support their important work and help them perform at their best. The fourth is standards, reporting and accountability. We recommend establishing clear and consistent codes of conduct alongside an independent complaint body where it is safe to make a report, standards are enforced and people are held accountable through sanctions. The final shift is around safety and wellbeing. This includes a proactive approach to safety and wellbeing, including a focus on prevention to meet applicable work health and safety duties. It also involves developing policies to restrict alcohol use in line with harm minimisation and safety principles. The recommendations are a package. They are mutually reinforcing and complementary and therefore should not be cherry-picked for implementation. We are recommending that the implementation is phased to ensure that immediate priorities can be progressed while new structures and mechanisms are established. The next election provides an important opportunity to set people up for success through proper induction, training and HR processes. If this year has made one thing clear, it is that these issues matter to an increasing number of Australians. It matters because we all need Parliament to function at its best and deliver good decision making. I am optimistic about change. In engaging the Australian Human Rights Commission to conduct this independent review, there was courage to hear confronting truths and an appetite to learn. We heard through consultations and submissions that there is a strong commitment for change, and our report now provides a practical pathway to deliver that change. I'm grateful to everyone who contributed their voice to this review and I'm really proud of the talented team who've worked on this review with sensitivity, wisdom, dedication and urgency. We're asking the nation's parliament to do no more than it expects from all Australian workplaces. At its heart, this report describes how parliament can create safe, respectful and inclusive working environments to ensure it can attract the best who can deliver the best for us. This is a firm basis for an historic legacy this parliament can leave, creating a stronger parliament for the future. Thank you.
Questions now? Yep. Some of these numbers are pretty confronting. 1 in 3 staff have experienced sexual harassment. Were you shocked by the findings and the stories that you heard?
I did expect that there would be, because I know what happens across Australian workplaces, so that 1 in 3 Australian workers is actually experienced sexual harassment in the last 5 years. So to some degree, I wasn't shocked. But those 500 or so interviews that we did made us really hear in real terms how that works in practice. And that statistic of more than half have experienced one or more of bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault was really concerning. If I come to the specifics, to some degree I was shocked at how the young workers who perhaps arrive really positive and enthusiastic and feeling privileged to work there, how quickly they become in an environment where this bullying and harassment is normalised. I'd say I was a little shocked, even though I expected women to experience a more difficult situation, but certainly it's really clear that our female parliamentarians have a much tougher time in that place, whether it's through online abuse, direct sexual harassment. The rates were amongst the highest in the reporting, and that was really shocking to me, but perhaps recognises those drivers of power and gender inequality, and recognising that still in our workplace the majority of senior roles are not held by women.
Can I just ask about the standards around alcohol use? What do you think should be done there, and what sorts of standards should be implemented, and what would that look like?
So the issue of alcohol use was a very consistent theme that came up across the inquiry. We have made a recommendation that the Parliament sets for itself a policy, and particularly looks at harm minimisation and work health and safety obligations. Now, what would that look like in practice? We did hear some offices actually have a no alcohol policy. We also did hear that whilst alcohol was consumed in the premises, some of the most concerning conduct was pressure to drink outside of Parliament and in social environments. So we have given some guidance that there should be some restrictions and some governance around that, really to bring it in line with what happens in most workplaces in Australia now. So we've asked Parliament to recommend what those standards would be. We've made a pretty clear picture on how that might work. So we didn't come up with a no alcohol because this conduct isn't caused by alcohol. It is one of the risk factors at play, but that's not a solution to the issue of the systemic issues of bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault.
So the kinds of restrictions they could implement, is there any example?
There might be limitations on availability, where you can drink, what the hours of drinking are, but really just setting standards like normal workplaces. So if many people watching this will know there are lots of different standards in different workplaces, usually driven by safety and harm minimisation. So we have made recommendations both about the policy but also education across the board. And other recommendations involve things like creating opportunities for networking that don't involve alcohol.
You speak about gender diversity targets, but would you recommend quotas? What do you think about them?
We did consider that, but no, we haven't recommended that. What we have recommended is what we know works in terms of advancing diversity. So to really underpin this, we did find the 4 key drivers of this misconduct were power imbalances, gender inequality, lack of accountability, and really lack of diversity. So when you look at those, there's an urgent need to change, and that's why one of the key shifts is to bring to the Parliament better diversity. The reality is Parliament should match the community. If there's one workplace that should represent the community, it absolutely is our Parliament. In considering what the best practice is, we did look at the need for targets and also public reporting so that we can both in the workplace and externally understand what's happening, particularly also looking at positions. So not only for parliamentarians but within MOPS Act staff, so the parliamentarian staffers. When you look at the spread of the workplace, and that's in the report, you will see that whilst there are more women as parliamentary staffers than men, the majority of the senior roles are held by men. So there's a real imbalance. So we did look at specifically targets, setting that. We know in other contexts that's work, then also requiring specific actions to achieve those targets and an external reporting. And we've drawn on things like the ASX listing rules and in other countries and other companies what has worked.
You mentioned the recommendations are a package and they should be implemented in that fashion. Given what happened with the Respect at Work report, how confident are you the government will implement these as a package? And as a phased implementation, what do you think is the top priority that should be done first?
So I'll take the second half first. We have recommended, so we were quite practical in looking at both what the problems were. We got massive evidence. We know that our solutions are the solutions that were put to us by those 1,700 participants. And then in terms of the implementation, in the report we've provided an implementation for over 2 years, every 6 months. If I super simplify it, the first 6 months, while those bigger structures that we've recommended are being established, focus on setting up the things that will be needed so when the next election happens and there is a new parliament that sits, that might include new or previous people working there, that moment, that transition point can be set up for success. In terms of the government response, one of my key observations about this is this was engaged for us to do this with both the support of the government, the opposition, the Greens and the crossbench. It has had full parliamentary support as we have gone about the investigation, which has been an incredible privilege and I think unusual because of the nature of how government normally works. And our recommendations really are to the whole Parliament. So we would look to an expectation that, and we're being informed that all parts of the Parliament are taking these recommendations seriously. So I guess I'm an optimist, but I'm also really certain that this piece of work reflects the voices of the people that work in there, including the 147 current and former parliamentarians who participated. So there's a really good ground for this to be implemented, and I will look forward to the response in due course.
Yeah. You spoke about the factors that are kind of peculiar to the workplace of Parliament, but the win at all costs attitude, for example, surely a lot of that would translate over to corporate Australia as well. Do we have any sense of kind of how Parliament compares to corporate Australia?
Yeah, so I'll just describe, because while some of those things exist in other workplaces, it's absolutely a unique combination. So if I, as well as describing those 4 drivers, we talked about the systemic risk factors that exist in Parliament. So if I just give you kind of the overview of the 5 of them, you'll realise that it's actually more risk factors that exist in many corporate workplaces. So the first was just multiple workers in this one workplace, but with unclear or inconsistent standards. So there wasn't sort of one code of conduct or one clear standard expected in the workplace. Second was the leadership, or really a lack of people leadership skills, the lack of focus of particularly parliamentarians on their job as an employer. Their focus absolutely is on their job of representing us and as parliamentarians. So that's the second. Another one is the workplace dynamics, the fear, loyalty, and particularly that sort of political dynamic that exists inevitably in Parliament. Other things were the social conditions of work. So this is a fly-in, fly-out, 22 weeks you're in Canberra, the rest of the time you're at your location, irregular hours, high pressure, high scrutiny, lots of focus, really quite unusual. You can't really compare it to many other industries in that sense. And then the final thing was the employment structures. So the main, if you'd like to say, the bosses are actually elected parliamentarians. They're not employed, they're not senior executives. And then you have a whole category of people that are the members of parliament staffers who are employed under their own act with their own particular circumstances. And then you have the press gallery and you have the public servants. Everyone's employed under different arrangements that have come about over time. So I know I'm giving you the long version, but there is just a bucket load of risk factors there that in combination particularly put young people, I would say young staffers, particularly the what's called the MOPS Act staffers, and in practice the female parliamentarians and women across the board at high risk. The need to sort of maintain your relationships and your reputation to get ahead when doing that can put you at personal risk.
What is your view on how the Prime Minister has handled this process, and how confident are you that there will be a change in culture in this workplace?
Well, in terms of our experience of the process, we were engaged in March. As I've already mentioned, pay huge credit to a number of the women in particular who'd spoken out about their experiences, but most recently Brittany Higgins. We were engaged and we were aware that this was a highly political, highly sensitive issue. So from our point of view, from the engagement, we have been given full opportunity to engage in this process in an independent, trauma-informed, highly confidential way. And there has been, so from my point of view, nothing but support from all parts of Parliament for this piece of work. In terms of, am I confident? I said I was optimistic, but am I confident? I'm actually confident that there will be change. Not simply because we've delivered a really useful, practical and evidence-based report, but also because the broader Australian community, including other workplaces, just absolutely expect more from all workplaces. There is a huge momentum for change across the board, and there's no question, you know, the report is called Set the Standard, that we have made recommendations that say you should actually be meeting the standards that you set for other workplaces, but there's no question that the Australian community is saying actually you should be the model and the example. And so for all of those reasons, I think this is the moment where change is going to happen, and with the full parliamentary support for it, then that's what you need to get the move forward.
I'm just wondering, Brittany took a huge risk in coming out publicly, and there's been many cases, I guess, for women where it hasn't ended, well, it's ended badly for them in terms of putting their necks out, sticking their necks out. To what extent is the Me Too movement zeitgeist? To what extent does that explain why it kind of worked out favourably for her going public? And does this get complex too in terms of, I'm just thinking about cricketers who are embroiled in these sorts of issues, and you know, there are questions about, you know, do we get both sides of the story? Is it all now weighted towards the woman in these situations?
My brain, so I'm not sure that it would be right to say this has worked out favourably for Brittany. So I'll just make that comment up front. As someone who holds this really important role of Sex Discrimination Commissioner, but also someone who's worked in this area for 20 years, there's no question that whilst we've had change, often the public or community conversation really moves the change along. In some ways, I regard it as my role to make sure that our system structures, our institutions are safe, that people can go within the institution to get the supports they need and get the justice they need, and that they don't need to report to media reporting as a mechanism to get change. that is not, this year is not the only time that we've seen that. Over time, and I would to some degree say the Respect at Work inquiry that we conducted was launched off the back of the Harvey Weinstein reporting. So I would say that as a community we need to listen to the evidence, but we shouldn't be demanding people speak up. So for all of the courage that it took for Brittany Higgins to speak up, and Grace Tame and Chanel Contox and Saxon Mullins, there are so many other women. The statistics tell us that the issue of violence against women in particular and against men is incredible. And I would hate to think for those people who weren't able to get that platform or didn't want to speak, that is any less courageous. But I think the momentum is that as a community, we've got to stop asking these people to step up, to share their trauma with us. We need to provide that. If they want to speak, we want to support them. But so as we deliver this report, I guess I'm sort of bouncing off that question that we have also worked with Full Stop Foundation to provide a resource. We recognise both at the time earlier this year, but also now, it's not just people who work in Parliament who might be triggered by hearing about experiences of bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault. As a community, we need to work on that and we need to prevent it. But if you're affected, then you should get help.
I did have another question, but you raised it the second I put my hand up, so I will just ask again, at the risk of making this too much about Brittany, have you spoken to her or has she been briefed on this report this morning?
I have, yes, I've spoken to Brittany. I briefed her yesterday on the report. It is not a report, it acknowledges her important role, but as I mentioned, it's not about an individual case, and I'm not going to talk about her specific circumstances because it is a report that is designed to try and look at what systemic changes we can make to make sure people don't experience misconduct, but if they do, they have places to go. But yes, I have briefed her.
Do we have, like, do you have an idea of like how bad the situation is now compared to historically? Obviously, this kind of review has not necessarily been done in the past, but just, you know, Parliament as a place, the culture that's ingrained, is this something that's existed for a long time, as the Prime Minister was saying this morning, or did it get worse? Do we have an idea of that?
So the review that we conducted was open to current and former participants in the workplace, and so I know that we have heard stories of people who were in the workplace up to 30 and 40 years ago. So that's the first thing I can say, that this draws from the experience in the past. If I make a general comment, there were plenty of people who said this is not something that just happens now, in terms of some of the risk factors, the sexism, the sexual harassment, the drinking, the sort of work hard, play hard kind of culture has been around for a long time. The advantage of getting people from the past and now, though, is we could ask, if there was an office or if there was a situation where you felt safe and supportive, what was that like? So we definitely, I've already said, there are multiple working environments and work cultures. The point of this report, and in fact it's one of the broader recommendations of Respect at Work, is that in particular industries you have particular risk factors and particular drivers. So to the extent that we heard, we haven't ever done a survey like this, so I can't give you the comparison in that sense. But we do know that a lot of the risk factors that I've just mentioned to you, the fly in, fly out, the long hours, the MOPS Act has been in place since 1984, the predominantly men in leadership roles, the gender inequality, lack of accountability, that has existed for a long time. So if we even just think 1984 for the MOPS Act, one of our recommendations is you should review that to modernise it to match what the workplace is like now. So my broad comment would be, because the nature of parliaments, how we do democracy, how we have people come in from their electorate, how we have electorate officers, 227 of them across the country, all of that kind of structure does create risks, and it hasn't had the support of some of the recommendations we're making now. So that's a bit of a, I think it's been around because it's a systemic issue. And I think that, well, I know that our recommendations were really designed around not thinking that what we should be doing is educating people to change the people, because we'll get a new lot of people in and actually the problems are long-standing. So we were looking at the structures and the systems to make sure that the workplace is safe no matter who comes into it.
I think that's it. Can I just ask a question? Is there any danger that, I mean, what if we get it wrong, the media gets it wrong, we can taint people's reputations forever? Is there any caution that needs to be exercised in the way we deal with sexual harassment allegations?
Yes, there's absolutely recommendations for media. So if I start with the Respect at Work report, which looked specifically about some recommendations, Our Watch is currently preparing some guidance, because better reporting on sexual harassment, which I think we've seen in more recent times, has led the community to better understand how sexual harassment works. So if you paint a picture of that there's one man who's a real problem, then you're misunderstanding that this is a systemic problem that's occurring to a lot of people. In terms of this report, we definitely heard that media are a key player in the workplace. It's an unusual workplace where you have the media who actually have their offices located in your workplace. None of us, I think no one else has that situation. And you are absolutely right that we heard very much that advancement depended on relationships and reputations, and media reporting was critical for reputations. I mean, there's a lot I could talk to you about that, but the one thing I would most strongly emphasise is that women, parliamentarians or staffers, had a lot more risk in relation to rumours, gossip, innuendo, sexist remarks, sexual remarks, and that had a much bigger impact on their careers, their opportunities. So what I then heard, and our team heard, was that women make decisions about what they will do and where they will go with things based on what might be reported by the media or said by others. And that means that they might choose not to attend events, they might make sure they're keeping themselves safe, and also really take themselves out of things where we would want them to be. So that was really a strong theme for me, is that it was a mix of the gossip and the political parties, political sort of discussion, but the reporting, it being rigorous, is really important both for democracy, but also that it's rigorous and factual and not mischievous is really important for particularly women's careers in that place.
But also, I'm just thinking for men, if the media gets it wrong.
It's true for everyone. So that's when I said power runs in multiple directions. It does run up, down, across. And that includes media, staffers, and parliamentarians.
All right, that's it. Thanks everyone. I might do a few photos, but have a glass.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you.